One of the hardest pieces of a divorce and even post divorce is figuring out how in the world to work with somebody that you didn't even want to live with. Especially when there's kids involved, it can just get really messy. Hey guys, my name's Rebecca. I'm a divorce specialist. I work with people who are trying to buy and sell houses. One of the things that I've been doing lately is talking with industry professionals to get their opinion on how to make this whole process a little bit more simple. So today I've got Adam.
My name's Adam Lynch. I've been a licensed marriage and family therapist for 15 years.
So my goal for our conversation today is just to be able to ask you some questions that people may have for someone who is either in a marriage that's feeling really rocky, they don't know what to do about communication, or maybe they're already separated and they're trying to figure out what the heck do I do. I want to jump into some of the FAQs that I've had people just send my way, and I'm not answering the questions, so it feels like really validating.
Yeah, it's good to know. That's exciting.
Just to start with, what do you think one of the main misconceptions is about specifically co-parenting therapy? Or maybe we should even back up and have you explain what is co-parenting therapy.
Yeah, good call. Maybe I'll take it a slightly different direction too. I think misconceptions in general about counseling, about couples therapy, and then maybe specifically co-parenting therapy, where you would see really a lot of complex things going on, multiple people, sometimes multiple kids. And so you've got all these different dynamics going on all at once. And so I think some people would approach co-parenting therapy and say, that's just too complicated, too messy, too difficult. Maybe a therapist can help one person or can maybe talk us out of some of our conflict. But when you're talking about kids and my views versus that person's views, it's too overwhelming and too complicated for anyone to help. I think that's a misconception. I would say that at any juncture along the way, whether the divorce is finalized, whether there's a separation, whether there's really just talk of divorce, I think that most people benefit at some level from having a space where they can discuss concerns, where they can forecast, hey, these are the issues we might see with our kids or things that we might really wrestle through at any juncture along the way. So it's not just about the here and now, but it's also the future. I think cost and what people value sometimes is an issue. You already spend a lot of money potentially with attorneys or like with your field and people moving to different homes. It's costly. I really want people to look at therapy as having an incredible value for them as an individual currently and in the future. Also just the relationship dynamics, and then even just preserving healthy relationships with their kids to the best of their ability. Like that is, to me, invaluable.
You said something that just already triggered a thought in my head. A lot of the people that I work with and just have conversations with now at this point are like, I just want to get divorced to get this person out of my life. And they feel like, okay, if I set up therapy with this person, that's like making me interact with somebody who's caused me so much pain. As a licensed therapist, what's your thought on that? If that was my objection, I already hate that guy. He said some really mean things to me. Why would I want to sit with you and expose myself to that more?
It's a really good question. Maybe I'll step back and say that a therapist isn't going to tell you that you have to endure all of those angst and pressures and frustrations. We're not here to save what's already lost. There can be that potential. That's not something a therapist is. That's not our role. We're not here to just force things to go together. I think what I would encourage that person to think about is when you have kids, when you have divorce, like that's the kind of, I'm going to say this term loosely, but it's a kind of trauma that occurs when you're going through what could be considered a traumatic experience like a divorce, and you're being asked to put yourself out there again, to be engaged, to try to be collaborative with a person that you're very hurt by, offended by. I think a therapist is really trained and skilled in just working through those feelings to the point where you can start to collaborate and work, right? So it's not as though we're going to ignore all that. We're going to pay very close attention to that. It's always to honor people's feelings, but also to move them into a place where they can have constructive conversations no matter what has happened.
Okay, when you sit down with a couple, they're probably in your office because there's something that has happened, right? What are some of the first things you look for in like how a session's going to go? Like, do you start to pick up on body language? What's some of that nuanced behind the scenes?
Yeah, good question. I've probably worked with 500 to 1,000 couples in my career already. I can recognize maybe where this person's sticky points are, where the hurdles are. I can recognize where this person's are. I've seen that before. I've seen some of that. In my opinion, every relationship dynamic is super unique. So I try to approach it like that. But I think if I could step back and say, hey, here's some general things that I recognize when it comes to seeing whether a couple's in a real pickle or if maybe they need to work through a few minor things and then hopefully get some momentum and hopefully that'll help them off of that. People would assume that there's a lot of tension, a lot of stress, frustration, anger. Obviously, that's something that would indicate there's significant challenges. But it might surprise you that a lot of times when I'm thinking about the most challenging thing to address with a couple is this idea of indifference. It means that I have worked through every emotion that I could possibly feel to try to salvage this relationship.
Yeah.
And now I just don't care anymore. It's this posture of, I don't have enough emotion to fight anymore. And so I always tell couples, like, hey, I can work with fighting, I can work with conflict. It's really hard to work with indifference because it means that you've probably given up. It's possible, but it's just a lot more difficult.
That's such a great response. One of the things that I think people sometimes are scared about, at least when they talk to me as like a friend, going to counseling, is that the therapist isn't going to pick up on some of these. We've had hours of fights before I finally come and sit down in front of you. And like maybe it's starting over in a way that I don't want because I'm carrying all this into your office and I just want you to fix it. But you made a comment about you're really looking for momentum. Talk more about that.
Momentum could look, this big, or it can look this big, or anything in between. I think a good therapist recognizes that we might need to pause and deconstruct all of the conflicts and issues and anger and tension, and that maybe just by having a slightly different perspective about it, like we've moved the needle a little bit. We've given a couple a different perspective. Or maybe we've just reduced anxiety and tension in the room or in the relationship. You can build off of those things. The reality is, a lot of couples who are in those give up places have exhausted so many feelings and thoughts and conversations to the point where there hasn't been momentum for a while. To come into a place and have these conversations or rethink something in a different way, to look at that and say, whoa, that feels different. It feels like I might be able to build off of that. I just give people a dose of hope.
Okay, that's good. Come here. I love that phrase, a dose of hope. Okay. So, as somebody who's been in the therapy world for 14 years, you're like very comfortable here. What advice would you have for somebody that's never sat down with a therapist before?
I think comfortability is key.
Okay.
I think recognizing that the hesitation that you have is totally fine. It's reasonable. It is this process of going and telling pretty intimate details about your life to someone that you don't know. I would validate that discomfort and just say, hey, if you need to ask questions, if you need to have a consultation, most therapists anymore offer those kind of things. Hey, this needs to be a comfortable process. It affirms that is a priority for most therapists, I would say. And definitely think about logistically how you're going to be able to make it work. Because I think clients might come in and say, hey, I'm hoping for 4 to 6 sessions or something like that. They have a plan. I think the reality is it's hard to build a relationship with somebody that quickly that you can start to trust and share more details or more of your past, or even start to develop strategies for moving forward. Right. So I think just having a little bit of an openness of, okay, how am I going to make this work? I'm probably going to have to maybe budget a little differently, or I think something I'm seeing often now, and I'm very excited about it, to be honest with you, is that we all have different needs, right? I know this is expensive. It's a time investment. It's an energy investment. When I get done with some of the big therapy sessions that I've worked through, it's like, I just have to go home and sit on the couch and stare blankly at the wall for a second because your body processing all of this stuff that comes up is wild. Stop like hours of work. Here's an interesting therapist question for you. I have a friend whose husband is in therapy for some big T trauma stuff that happened in his childhood. And she made the comment to me the other day, he's really great after therapy and we feel good and we talk. And then a couple days later, like he hits a wall. And it's happened 3 or 4 times. And I'm like, I think I remember that from some of my stuff. Is the brain process emotions that way? That's a great question. Sometimes? Yeah, I think it's a phenomenon that we run into a lot. I think as humans, we aren't meant to be in those spaces for massively extended periods of time. We are meant to get things moving and get our brain and emotion registering and processing things at a pretty good clip when we're in therapy. But then when we step out of it, like our minds can't do that. They can't keep up. Inertia is strong, right? When it comes to human emotion, it says, hey, I can get a lot of this out, I can process it, but then I'm going to be tempted to go back to normal. I'm going to not want to be thinking so hard, feeling so hard, like working through all this all the time. And so I am going to gravitate back towards this sense of inertia and my normalcy. And I think the other reason, like you said, it's exhausting.
Right.
I think people get tired. And maybe what happens too is it's a good tired, but then from an emotional exhaustion standpoint, people get so tired, so exhausted that they go backwards. Because who operates? You have children, I have children, like myself included. I don't operate well when I'm exhausted.
No.
And so I think that's not a great expectation to have of people who are working really hard on their emotional health, their mental health, to expect that they are not only going to process things, but that change is just going to stick and everything's going to be better all the time.
In the middle of those conversations, how do you help someone navigate through big feelings in front of someone? Like, how would you help me navigate through big feelings that I may not want to express in front of my ex-husband? What do those dynamics look like?
But I think people who are trying to figure out exactly how to navigate big emotions with one person probably need to have more support or more relationships. I think couples who have the most success with therapy are ones where they have been able to lean on each other at an appropriate level. It's like, okay, I can share these things, I can process these things at this level, but I might need a friend, I might need a parent, I might need a sibling to help me work through what I'm feeling. And so that allows people to, or a therapist, right? An individual therapist. So that allows people to come to those sessions and process the appropriate amount of emotion with that person in the moment. Does that make sense?
It does. One of the things that my fiance and I say back and forth to each other, and I don't know if your opinion of this as a professional therapist is going to be like, that makes a lot of sense, or it just works in our family. Both of our exes are involved in kids' lives. They're around a lot. And I probably like his ex more than he does, and he probably likes my ex more than I do. One of the things we say is this person has been in the past really toxic for you, but that doesn't mean that they show up in the world in a way that everybody is going to have those same like feelings and damages. So like the phrase that we use sometimes is like, hey, she's just toxic for you. Maybe I can have that conversation with her. Are there some conversations that you see in your office that you're like, hey guys, we're going to table that? If you sense that there's a topic that you're like, that is really big, do you start like piecing out the questions, or do you dive right in at the big topic?
I have not just come to this place where I would say there's always a right approach. I would say there is an open-minded approach that might work as I'm gathering information, as I'm gathering context, as I'm understanding how people process and at what levels, as I'm figuring out what's meaningful to them. I'd say, hey, it seems like these people are ready to dive into the big stuff. Or I might say, ooh, this is going to be tricky. I think we need to chunk this up. We need to find appropriate or palatable levels of information that these people can actually chew on and wrestle with.
It's almost like I do a lot of sports and physical activities. Yeah. It's like you're the coach and you're like, yeah. I know she can lift a little bit more. Like that's her max. She can't go any further down whatever that rabbit hole is.
Yeah, if she does, it could be really costly or painful, right? So it's incredibly delicate.
That makes me feel better as someone who's typically attending therapy, that you've got everybody's best interest. So, Adam, you do a ton of work with blended families, people who are working on their marriage, just things that aren't a traditional family. It sounds like that's your passion. So my first question is, what about those situations draws you to them?
Beautiful question. I think complexity and like the journey of life doesn't just come at you with this path that everything is very clear. I think that a lot of people, probably the majority of people nowadays, have hit some kind of major hurdle in life or complicated hurdle. And so I look at the situations, these blended family situations, or even working with personalities or types of people that traditionally wouldn't be caught dead in therapy, and now there's this openness to it. I think of some of my older couples in their 50s and 60s. I think of clients that I have who are retiring and who are really wanting to understand what the next phase of life is. I think of the different ethnicities that I work with. I have an incredibly diverse clientele, things that look different, that feel different. To me personally, I feel like I'm learning so much from And so my head is being filled with people's knowledge, people's perceptions of life, like how they wrestle through things. I don't pretend like I know more about life than the person who's about to retire from a long career. I get to learn a lot from them. At the same time, I'm hoping that I'm asking the right questions and wrestling through the things that they need. So it's just, I think it's mentally stimulating. I think it's emotionally stimulating. And then I think it's really just the beauty of culture and the beauty of the world around us is that the more the more we understand what people are going through, I think the more impactful we can become every corner, every relationship we encounter.
Right.
The ability to think really hard and then to ask it's what I call the next best question, which is, okay, how do we get a little deeper? This blended family dynamic is very complicated. I want to go just a little deeper. So I just think like when you're working with complex scenarios, you get to really dial it in and really kind of work at focusing what the true issues are. And it's just really enlightening. I do think I really try to focus on attachment, which is, again, that's not an uncommon term in the therapy world, but attachment is basically what do our core relationships say about us? How do they influence us? How do relationships we're involved in as we grow older in life, not only just from the beginning of our birth and our relationship with our primary attachment figures, which are our parents, but also throughout life. How do we learn to develop relationships? What are the skills we have? We've been trained. What has come into our minds that has given us guidance about how relationships are supposed to be built? Maybe what are some misnomers or some actual lies that we've been told about how relationships are supposed to go? Because we do have to deconstruct those and reconsider them. I work with a lot of people who have been told things or have had somewhat poor examples of relationships to the point where just normalized a lot that inevitably has produced some negative results. They have to parse those inputs and say, okay, how do I want to form relationships? What do I want those to look like? How do I want to attach to people so that I'm not constantly in conflict or I'm not always traumatized or I can feel safe and I can build trust and maybe actually have a loving relationship at some point. So you think of how critical attachment is and how we learn that throughout our life at all the different stages. And to think at some point you're going to be sitting in a counseling room with a therapist and unpacking all that. I just love being that person. I love to be that person that's unpacking. This is how things played out for you. Maybe this is how we could do things a little differently.
I love that. So you and I connected in our first conversation about spirituality and how much of a role that played in both of our lives. I think sometimes people worry when they go to someone that would claim to be a Christian counselor or a Christian therapist, would feel like shoved in a direction that they don't feel comfortable with. Can you talk a little bit about how your faith plays a role in your business, but also on a professional level? I think you shared a little bit about how you really do have to keep some of that separate.
100%. It's a very complicated thing, and I think most therapists really struggle to know, how do I apply my religious beliefs, my spirituality, my faith into what I do, because it seems like that's so critical to development and who a person strives to be. And so if I can't talk about that, it really limits my capabilities to be able to help people. I do think the laws are the laws, and they talk about, hey, you can't convince someone to believe a certain way, you can't pull them in a certain direction, but you can be responsive. You can say, hey, if that's something you want to talk about, I'm ready. I'm safe. I'm here. I'm not going to try to, again, convince you of anything, but I am going to maybe dig in and ask the appropriate questions that honors where you're at spiritually or what you want to talk about spiritually, but also says, hey, how do we maybe open our eyes a little bit more, open our hearts a little bit more to what else is there, right? Because I think there's been a lot of damage done. I've met with clients who've experienced religious trauma and who've been hurt deeply by spiritual figures in their lives. And so for me to come in guns blazing, like really attacking and trying to tell someone what to think, I think is an incredibly dangerous precedent. And so I do want to respect that some of those laws and ethics are there for a really good reason. They're there to protect people. But I also want to acknowledge that we have to be open as therapists to having those types of conversations with people who are ready, not to shut it down simply because we're fearful of potential consequences. So what I've heard, a lot of things that you've said today, which I kind of just wish I could get in your brain.
do this for 2 hours, is that there's so much momentum that can be had from sitting down with somebody who genuinely cares like you do. Even just the 30 minutes we've spent together, like, you really care about the work that you're helping people through, have your 10,000 hours in working with people and their trauma. If somebody has watched now 20, 30 minutes of this video of us talking back and forth, I would just encourage you, continue with that momentum. Maybe it's a reach out to Adam for a 15-minute free consultation like what he's talked about. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's incredibly thoughtful. Thank you. I appreciate you, and I was excited to do this, and it seems like it worked out pretty well.